For the past 3 decades, the U.S.'s military adventures in the Middle East took an untold number of lives and cost trillions of dollars. But after Joe Biden took office last year, he vowed to end America's endless wars. Since then, the U.S. has cut its support for the Saudi-led campaign in Yemen, reduced its troop presence in Iraq, and pulled out of Afghanistan. Many analysts have pointed to the vacuum left by the U.S.'s disengagement that many global powers are looking to fill. The EU could be one of them. Russia's attack on Ukraine and the sanctions that followed has reignited the importance of Middle East energy. As Europe looks to wean itself off Russian natural gas and oil, countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been pushed to fill those gaps. But the Middle East is also seeing its own shifts as several Arab countries move to normalize relations with Israel. Could the EU play a major role in a multipolar Middle East alongside the US, China, Russia, and Iran? And to discuss what role Europe could play in the Middle East, joining me now from Berlin is Cinzia Bianco. She's a research fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. And from Berlin, Fathollah-Nejad. He is an associate fellow at the American University of Beirut. A warm welcome to you both. Thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. Cinzia, let me begin with you. Has the Biden administration's partial disengagement from the Middle East created a vacuum or an opportunity for other players, in this case, Europeans, to secure more energy deals, infrastructure projects and investments?
Definitely, the U.S. retrenchment from the Middle East has created space, you can call it vacuum, and opportunities. And this space and these opportunities have been already eyed by rival players such as Russia and China. For the Europeans, it's a slightly different situation because they are still working on how to address that massive change geopolitically triggered by a U.S. retrenchment. On one hand, of course, there are more opportunities that are opening for the European firms and politically, but at the same time, it's also a challenge to rebalance an order, a US-led order that was very favorable for Europeans.
So, Ali, what was the driving force behind the U.S. Policy change? Is it no longer dependent on Middle Eastern energy supplies, or was it the focus on other regions like the Asia-Pacific?
Well, this is not a new development. I mean, we've seen it over the past few decades playing out. And especially during the Obama administration, there was a clear geopolitical reorientation toward the Pacific region, the so-called Asia pivot. But nevertheless, we're talking here about a relative retreat of the United States from the Middle East. And of course, in terms of the energy centrality of the Middle East, this doesn't play the same role as it used to in terms of US global hegemony. But nevertheless, still hydrocarbon resources are important. Still, the United States is, can be a dominant player if it wants to, because it could control, the outflow of energy. But what we're seeing is basically a relative retreat here, and I don't think that it's going to be it's going to be forgotten by the United States. But we surely have other priorities for the United States, which is China.
Yes. So, Cinzia, for decades we know that the U.S. Played a significant role as a guarantor for the region's security. How could this role change in the years to come, and who will be in charge of it next?
That's, the very interesting question. And it is unsettling also from a European perspective, because the answer is that nobody will step in to cover 100% for the US and the role that they have played for decades as a security guarantor in the region. What will probably happen is that we will see a security mosaic or patchwork of different players stepping in to secure different interests or different regions in the sub-regions in the wider Middle East and North Africa region. And these players could be external, but definitely we are seeing an increasing interest by regional players to step up their own security capabilities and try to assure and assume more responsibility for the local security. So it will be a patchwork. There will be a growing role for regional players, but there will also be a supporting role for different external players. And here is where some Europeans, in particular, for example, France, are definitely into the equation.
So, Ali, long accustomed to moving in unison with the United States, what would a more independent European approach to the region look like? For example, could it go as far as to forge a separate nuclear deal with Iran in the future?
Well, I don't think so that the European powers can play such a prominent role without the United States. Of course, they can step in in the Middle East, given relative U.S. retreat in order to do business. But when it comes to security issues, I think the United States is still, indispensable here. Mm-hmm. And what we're also seeing now in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a kind of rethinking of long-established paradigms of European foreign and security policy. Vis-a-vis the Middle East, but also vis-a-vis other autocratic regions and countries, mm-hmm. And that because so far we've seen, the paradigm of authoritarian stability very much being dominant in European foreign policy toward the Middle East, and in many instances it was geared toward making business, basically. But now, given the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the destabilizing of the European security order, there is increasing awareness that there are a lot of geopolitical risks associated with such an approach.
Yes.
So we have to wait and see how the debate unfolds. But we may see some kind of a rethinking of European engagement vis-a-vis countries like China, Russia, and also Iran. And there are also patterns of dependency that a lot of European countries have so far ignored vis-a-vis those non-Western great powers.
So, Cinzia, what would a Russia and China-dominated region mean for the U.S. and European interests? I mean, how to counter their influence?
I mean, these are, first of all, there's not really a contemplation of a credible scenario of a Russia and China-dominated Middle East in Europe nor in the United States. Simply because there's a very clear understanding that a Russia-China-dominated region, first of all, is not really in the cards, because, as we have mentioned before, it's more likely that we will see a combination of different players stepping up and growing their role.
Yes.
Secondly, especially in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the extremely poor performance of Russia militarily, the fact that they're basically on the run in Ukraine, especially from the central areas, we actually are foreseeing a weaker Russia in the Middle East, one that actually also leaves space for other players. And we may be starting to see something interesting in that sense in Syria, where the Russians have withdrawn some of their manpower and have agreed, for example, to leave more space to other players in Syria, including, for example, the United Arab Emirates. Yeah. So we're not really discussing a Russia-China-dominated Middle East any longer.
Yes. So, Ali, how has Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates' reluctance to align with the West on Ukraine added to the complexity of the geopolitical landscape there?
Well, the situation was complex, and the driving forces for such a behavior was present before the outbreak of the war. And this was, from those states that you mentioned, increasing incertitude about relying on U.S. protection. And as we've seen, there were numerous Iranian actions against UAE and Saudi Arabia in the past few years, where those countries had expected more security support from the United States. So this is not new. And so in terms of what you asked before, and I don't think in terms of Iran, I don't think that the Europeans can forge a nuclear deal with Iran. Europe does not have the leverage that it ought to have, which is sanctions leverage. So it's the United States that imposes those strong sanctions. And so it's basically, and it always been a matter when it comes to the Iran nuclear conflict, despite the mediating role of the European Union, it has always been, basically a game between two, between Washington and Tehran. And the strategic decisions in those two capitals were the ones that were decisive. And Europe, at best, could only be a supporting power, but not more than that.
So, Cinzia, since we're talking about these shifting balances, can we really talk about a multipolar Middle East? And are they really pursuing more independent foreign policies away from the US? If so, what has pushed them to do so?
I would agree. I would describe your description as very accurate. Sorry for the play of words. And I do think we are seeing multipolarity. We were already seeing that before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but we thought we were looking at a relatively quiet multipolarity where we had external players and regional players all claiming a role. However, after the invasion, what we're actually going to see is a rivalry-ridden and competition-ridden multipolarity, where the Middle East players actually risk a lot by finding themselves at the center of outer rivalries between different external players, right at the time where instead regional players had decided to put aside their own rivalries, or at least try to pursue a more coordinated approach, and precisely because they wanted to create a stronger regional bloc that may insulate them from these external rivalries.
All right, Cinzia. Ali, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.